Welcome to the learning curve. One of my favorite aspects about the things that I do here on the channel is that there's always new stuff to learn. But these things aren't always easy to learn, and there's never just one right way to do something. So in this series, I'll document my experience as I try a new activity while sifting through all the advice out there and doing some good old trial and error. Then I'll share what I learned and what really works in hopes that me sharing my learning curve with you will help you with your learning curve. And maybe some of you can even help me. Because hey, I'm just learning too. Hey guys, it is Mission Discover, and welcome to the first ever episode of The Learning Curve. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about BFS fishing, and more specifically, what I learned and my very first impression with this style of fishing. Now, if you're not familiar, the best way I can describe BFS super quickly is ultralight bait casting. Traditional bait casters are meant for a little bit bigger fish, a little bit heavier line and lures. They provide some really good accuracy and torque, but they can't throw those light lures that traditional spinning rods can, and that is where BFS comes in. It provides a way to throw those light lures while still getting the benefits of a bait caster. Or so they say. That's why we're here today. We're going to find out if all that is really true, and I'm going to see what I learned about this style of fishing. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to take you out, show you my first ever experience and my first trip out on the water with this setup. And I'm going to talk you through some of the things that I'm learning as I'm out there on the water. And we're going to bring you back here and talk a little bit more in detail about this setup, my first impressions of the setup, and my impressions of BFS fishing as a whole and what my thoughts are on that. So without further ado, we're going to hop right into it. This is so fun, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, I can't grab him. Let's go. First ever fish on the BFS, a little smallie. That was really fun. This glass rod handled the jumps of that smallmouth so well. Oftentimes we'll shake the hook, but this glass rod just really absorbed those vibrations and helped keep that fish on really well. Really happy with that. I'm gonna get a picture and toss him back. Right there, baby, right at my feet. Another aggressive little smallie. This one is very small. Ate a little 2-inch paddle tail, and he's probably only 5 inches long. There he goes. See you, buddy. Now, a couple things I want to mention about this system as I'm casting around here and fishing this pool is that I spent several hours just in my yard. There's a fish. Hold on. Let me fight this fish first, then I'll tell you what I was talking about. It's just another smallie. Oh, I dropped him back in the water. Not a wise idea, Nolan. There we go. Put that in the little folder down there. Third smallmouth of the day. Hopefully you can see that one better than the last two. I know that was a little bit like a silhouette there, but that's our third one of the day. Anyway, what I was saying here was that I spent several hours just, casting around in my front yard to be able to figure this out before I actually got out on the water and started fishing. And a couple of things that were really interesting for me was that I thought it was going to be super similar to standard bait caster fishing, and it really is the same in a couple key ways, but other than that, it's very, very different. And most of the similarities lie in just how the reel itself functions and some of the benefits that you get from it. But the way you actually cast the reel is a lot different from how you would cast a standard bait casting reel. It's a lot more loose. You have to be very diligent with your thumb because the whole setup is made to spin super freely so you can cast those light lures. And you just have to be very diligent to not have overruns, just like I did right there because I was not paying attention and talking to you. Near the end of this video, I'll talk more about what specifically is different and how I set up this reel so that I can cast it properly, and what I think the benefit of BFS systems are. But for right now, I'm just going to keep on fishing. I just wanted to put that out there so that you guys kind of understood what was going down here. Oh, another one just came off. My drag was a little bit too loose on that one, and this glass rod, given how bendy it is, if you don't have that drag set tight enough and the drag slips, it just does not have enough backbone to be able to take the brunt of the hook set by itself. But it needs the full drag of the reel to be able to help out on that hook set. Yes. Brown trout, baby. Let's go. Alrighty, so we are back at the house again, and I'm quickly going to run over my initial impressions of this setup. So starting with the rod, this is a Bass Pro Shops Microlite Glass Series casting rod. This rod will run you around $25, although you're typically going to have to pay for shipping because as of my research, this is not typically available in stores. When we're looking at the specs, this is a glass rod. It's 4 foot 10 inches long. It has 5 guides. It is a 2-piece rod. It comes standard with your traditional pistol grip style handle, although I have modified that. I'll talk about that in a minute though. And the handle is EVA foam covered with a fake cork. Now moving into my impressions of the rod, for $25, the fit and finish and overall quality of this rod is pretty doggone good. I don't really have many complaints. It is nice and flexy, definitely is an ultralight, and gives you that parabolic bend that you would expect from a glass rod, although it has a little bit more backbone than I was expecting, and that is actually something I really like. Some rods can get really noodly when they're made out of fiberglass, and this one isn't super noodly. It fits ultralight pretty well and gives you a nice bend. Handle is super comfortable, reel seat works well. Overall, it's just a pretty decent rod for the money. It does come with a hook holder as well. My only 2 complaints about the rod, and for the price, I'm really not complaining, is that I would add an additional guide somewhere up in this section. 6 guides would make the bend just a little bit better and the line control just a little bit nicer. It's not really an issue though, it's just something to consider. And as I mentioned, I did modify this pistol grip butt, and there's not really an issue with that. I just cut it off. The reason I did that is simply to make it fit better in my rod tubes and storage systems. There's no other reason than that. If you don't have to stick it in something like that, then there's no need to modify it. But for me, it just seemed better, and it's more functional, even though it does look a little funky. Alrighty, so moving into the reel, this is the Acura HICC 50 model. It will be listed under the brand name of Solo King if you find it on AliExpress, and under Doviello if you find it on Amazon. And depending on which model you get and which of those sites you get it from, it will be somewhere between 60 and 80 bucks. This particular version is the 8.1 to 1 gear ratio. I got it off of Amazon, and it comes with 2 spools. It has a more traditional bait casting spool that's a little bit deeper. However, it's still super lightweight and pretty ported and can cast some fairly light lures in my testing. And it also has this more BFS style spool, meaning it is shallower, doesn't hold a ton of line, and it's super lightweight. Has tons of holes drilled out of it, so that way it's light enough to actually spin and cast super light lures. Moving into the actual performance, for the price, I can't complain. First and foremost, it has to be able to cast those light lures, and it does with the BFS spool. I can get it down to around 32nd of an ounce very comfortably. And for someone who is new to BFS casting with a budget reel, 1/32 of an ounce is very, very respectable, and I would give it a check mark on being able to cast pretty light lures. It gets some decent distance on it too. It's also super ergonomic, nice and lightweight, feels really solid in the hand. It's nice and smooth out of the box and fairly easy to dial in. I only have 3 minor complaints, and they're not really complaints given the price point of this reel, just things I would change if I could. First of all, the thumb bar does get stuck down occasionally, and you'll have to pull it up with your thumb. And the drag does get stuck ever so slightly every once in a while. These are both things that have begun to decrease the more I've used the reel, and I think a little bit of oil and some break-in time will make these issues decrease even further. And then my only other issue is that this does have 5 braking settings and some intermediate settings as well. However, I have this set all the way up to 4 for just normal casting, meaning I think this could actually benefit from a couple more magnets to make it more versatile. If you have to do something like casting in the wind, this might not have enough braking force to be able to do that, but it's not really that big of an issue, and I haven't had any sort of problems with it yet. Just something that I think could happen in the future. Alrighty, so I'm going to quickly run over how I actually set up my BFS reel and how I do my casts to make sure that I have good distance and accuracy while not backlashing. So right out of the box, I noticed that if I tried to set this up the same way I do my traditional bass bait casting reels, it was very difficult to find a sweet spot between it being too tight and too loose. So I went to the internet and looked for some advice on the subject. In my research, I found the channels of Rar Fishing and Hobie-Wan Kenobi. They both suggested tightening my tension knob up just enough to where there's no back and forth play in the spool, and then adjusting everything else for backlashes, distance, accuracy, that sort of thing by using my braking system. And I followed their advice. With the method that they suggested, I really liked it, except for one major flaw. And that was that you had to use the braking system to adjust between different lure weights instead of your spool tension knob. What this means is it wasn't quite as exact, and I couldn't get a really fine adjustment and get it to exactly where I wanted, like I could if I was using the tension knob. Additionally, I adjust with the tension knob on both of my bass bait casting reels, and I thought having it the same across the board would be really nice, so I wanted to find a way to do that. The way in which I got to that point is I took the setup that I had with those 2 channels' advice, and from there I simultaneously adjusted my brakes and tension knob until I found a sweet spot. For example, if I adjusted my brakes up, I would pull my spool tension knob down, and vice versa. Once I found that sweet spot in the braking system, which happened to be 4, I would leave it there and I could just adjust it with the tension knob. Alrighty, so now I'm going to talk about what I learned when it comes to actually casting a BFS setup. So I talked a little bit about this while I was out on the water, but the main thing you have to keep in mind is that this is not exactly like a traditional bait casting setup, because the whole system is made to be super loose. That means you don't really want to put that much force into casting, and you have to be a little bit more diligent about making sure you're managing your overruns. What that all comes down to is you're not really going to want to put much force behind the cast. You're going to want to try and stick to sidearm casts most of the time, and if you do put more force into the cast, you're just going to have to be mindful of the fact that you're going to have to be super diligent with thumbing this spool. So to demonstrate here, your typical cast, instead of trying to put some force into it, you're just going to kind of slowly swing your arm, let the rod, reel, and lure do the work for you. Just like that, a little 3/32 ounce lure went about 70 feet. Not much effort put into it, just kind of let the system do the work for you. Another trick I learned just through some good old trial and error is that if you do want to do an overhand cast, actually turn your rod on its side like this, with your spool not facing upwards but facing to the side. Not exactly sure why this works, but it has worked for me. I think it just creates a little bit more friction somewhere in the system since the spool's not facing upwards. That type of overhand cast is going to look something like this, and it's just going to give you a little bit more control. So one last thing that I noticed about casting before we get into our final thoughts was that obviously I mentioned how this reel has to be so free and loose to cast such light lures. And that actually means that if you tighten up the brakes enough to where it's actually doing the brunt of the work and stopping it from backlashing, it will then not actually be loose enough to be able to do things with less momentum like flipping and pitching. So you just kind of have to accept with BFS that instead of your braking system doing most of the work when it comes to stopping you from backlashing, it's actually your thumb that's going to have to do most of that work. And this actually transferred over to me using my more standard bait casting reels as well. I adopted the same philosophy, loosened up my brakes a bit, and just realized that I was going to have to do more thumb maintenance on the spool speed. And this has allowed me to get a little bit more distance out of those systems and just have it spin freer when I'm doing things like flipping and pitching. I think it's something that you guys should think about as you get more advanced. Just continue to loosen and loosen and loosen and realize that you're going to have to take on more of the burden of maintaining your spool speed so that you don't backlash. And it will actually get you a lot more distance, more accuracy, and just get more of the performance out of your bait casting reel. Alrighty, so moving into my final thoughts on BFS fishing as a whole. First off, I do want to mention that comparable ultralight or light-powered spinning gear is going to be less expensive, it's going to be more versatile, and ultimately it can cast lighter lures than a BFS can. But there are still three main benefits that I see. It's ultimately up to you if these benefits are worth it, and I am not in any way saying that this is something that is an essential part of an ultralight or light tackle angler's arsenal. That being said, a BFS reel will give you better accuracy than a comparably sized ultralight spinning reel. If you're doing something like in this clip where I'm having to cast up under trees and get to those fish on a small creek, and I'm throwing smaller lures, then BFS is definitely going to be a benefit to you. And when I was doing my preliminary research, most of the people who are experienced in BFS said that this was the biggest advantage, and I wholeheartedly agree with them. The second main advantage of having a BFS rod and reel, and this is one that really speaks to me and is one of the main reasons that I picked up a BFS reel, is that it eliminates line twist. A spinning reel will wind the line around the spool instead of pulling it directly on, but a BFS reel, since it's a casting reel, will just pull the line directly on and minimize the twisting of the line. Especially throwing little moving baits like inline spinners and crankbaits, you get a lot of line twist and it will really throw off your casting and give you some big tangles. And I'm really looking forward to throwing some of those type lures on this BFS setup and minimizing that line twist. And then a final benefit of BFS, and this is one that I really figured out on the water and is one that I have not seen a lot of people talk about when doing my preliminary research, and that's that you just get a lot more control. I'm not talking about accuracy, I'm actually talking about control over the fish. For example, when I was fighting that slightly larger trout at the end of my first session earlier on in this video, I was actually able to tighten up the drag like I'm doing here with one hand. I was also able to simply press a button and let out more line so that I could effectively catch that fish instead of having to flip over a bail with my other hand. And even the simple fact that this has two knobs instead of one, when I let go of the handle and had to reach back down to grab the knob, it was easier to find it. Simple stuff like that makes it very, very confidence inspiring when you're using BFS reel. I think it helps you be able to land the fish more effectively. But with all that being said, that is all I'm going to have for you guys in this video here today. I will have a list of a whole bunch of different channels that gave me some really great BFS advice when I was doing research before I picked up this setup. That'll all be linked down in the description below. If you guys learned something and you enjoyed this video, make sure to give me a like and hit that subscribe button because I have more informational and educational content coming your way really, really soon. Also, drop a comment down below. Let me know what you guys learned. Let me know what you're struggling with your BFS journey, and maybe I can help out. And hey, if there's any experts out there watching this video, also leave a comment. It would be super helpful to me since I'm still a BFS beginner, and I'm sure many of the people watching this video would appreciate any advice that you have. But anyway, that's all I'm going to have time for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. God bless, and I'll see you next time.